On behalf of Diplomatic Connections for agreeing to this interview. And well, let's just start off by saying that the March 12 resolution by the League of Arab States, in fact, was what gave the United Nations the push to actually pass its own resolution allowing for the no-fly zone. But since then, it seems to me that the Arab states have gone, the League of Arab States has gone a little back on that. And I think Amr Moussa said recently that he would convene the League in order to reconsider that approval. Has that happened?
No, I think the position of the League is consistent. The League was appalled by what was going on in Libya and the attack on civilians, the hardship that the civilian population of Libya has endured as they were calling for more reform and freedom and so on. And the League met and took different steps, as you mentioned. They called for a no-fly zone, but they also suspended the active participation of the Libyan government in the meetings of the League as a first step. And then they asked the United Nations to impose a no-fly zone, and they did. Resolution 1973, adopted by the United Nations, I don't think would have been possible without the position of the Arab League on that. It reminds me a little bit about what happened in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. It was also through a resolution of the Arab League that the coalition that was formed at the time got the approval of the Arab world to try to liberate Kuwait and not to invade Iraq. This was very specific. It allowed some countries like Egypt, Syria, and Saudi Arabia to get involved.
Participate, yeah.
Exactly. So the same is happening now. The Arab League always provides the Arab legitimacy to any action in the region, just like the United Nations provides the international legitimacy to any action of the world community. So the position of the League is still the same, that there should be no occupation forces in Libya, that Libya should not be divided, and that the main aim is really to protect the civilian population. It did not call for regime change, just like the United Nations resolution did not call for regime change, because it believes that it is up to the Libyan people to decide on their fate and what kind of government and leadership they want. So the position of the Arab League has not backtracked, but it has expressed a certain concern that the military operations that took place there in imposing the no-fly zone has resulted in a lot of civilian casualties. And we know this happens in all conflict situations. The question of collateral damage, the question of mistakes, unintended maybe casualties, and that is what you mentioned. The Secretary General of the Arab League has expressed strong concern about this, and this is the feeling, because after all, this is an Arab country. These are Arab people that have been killed, and there is a kind of solidarity and sympathy with them throughout the Arab world.
But what happens if the no-fly zone shows itself not to be sufficient to check the danger to Libyan civilians? What would be the next step in your view?
Well, there should be a consensus among the international community. You know, there were different meetings lately on the Libyan issue. There was first a meeting in London, and then a meeting in Paris, or the other way around, Paris and then London, and then the contact group met in Doha in Qatar, and again there was an important meeting a few days ago in Cairo at the Arab League headquarters, sponsored both jointly by the United Nations and the Arab League, where Mr. Ban Ki-moon attended, and also the head of regional organizations, and they all focused on the need to find a solution to this issue, preferably a political resolution of the conflict. So I think there have been a lot of ideas floated around among the African Union sent a delegation. It has not maybe achieved its aims, but there are contacts going on between the Arab League and Libya, between the United Nations, and eventually we will see what happens. But this no-fly zone and the a sort of intervention that is going on now should be aimed really at protecting the people, at maybe reinforcing also the position of the transitional council that has been formed by the rebels, and a number of Arab countries are also involved in providing military support. Also, the humanitarian crisis is I think the most tragic of all this. We know that people are now stranded in a lot of spots in Libya, in towns. They are unable to get out. There's a big displacement and movement of refugees going to the borders of Egypt, of Tunisia, even going to Europe, and this is a big burden. It's a big challenge, I think, for the international community to help all these people.
You mentioned that Libya has contacts with the Arab League with regard to finding a solution. What sort of solution would the Libyans be discussing with the Arab League?
Well, I think they're talking about stopping the fighting, having a ceasefire, and then finding a way out of the crisis. To find maybe some safety zones for the civilians, and then, as I said, we believe it's up to the people of Libya to decide if they want a new leadership. What will happen to the present leadership? This is something, of course, pretty sensitive, and I think the people of Libya have to decide this. I don't think it's up to anyone else to impose themselves on them the kind of political settlement of the crisis, which people might talk about.
I think this takes, supposing the no-fly zone and whatever else, the alliance that is actually operating, implementing the UN resolution, supposing it goes on endlessly. Do you foresee that eventually Colonel Gaddafi will give up?
Well, I'm not in his shoes. I cannot predict this. But what I can say is that a number of countries have now recognized the rebel movement. Among them, Qatar, as an Arab country. I believe that France and Italy have also done it on the part of the European countries, and a lot of countries have also suggested there should be more support to the movement by giving them maybe weaponry they need to defend themselves. So there is an ongoing process, where this will lead. I don't think, no one has a crystal ball to predict how Colonel Gaddafi will decide what the position on the ground is. It's all very, unknown, I think, the situation. So it's difficult to predict how things will develop.
Do you believe that what is happening, what is unfolding in Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Jordan, Bahrain, to a lesser or greater degree, depending on the country, is positive and is destined to make a fundamental difference to life in these countries?
Well, definitely these are historic events that are taking place, and we're going to see a new region. There are some root causes of all this. If you look to the historic perspective of all this, already at the beginning, you have to look back to maybe 2002, when the first Arab Human Development Report was prepared by the United Nations in collaboration with the Arab League, I would say.
Yes.
And these reports, there were a series of 5 reports. They were drawn up by Arab intellectuals, and they talked about the deficits existing in the Arab world. Questions of good governance, questions of poverty, of education, and so on. And as a result of these reports, the Arab League took the initiative to adopt at a meeting in 2004, at a summit meeting in Tunisia, of a declaration calling reform and democratization and modernization of the Arab world. Reform meaning political reform, economic reform, social reform, educational reform, and so on. To be objective, a lot has been done since then. There were many reforms. Economic reforms were adopted, social reforms. I remember I was once at the World Bank, one of the annual meetings, and I heard that Mr. Zolik, the president of the World Bank, was talking about the reforms taking place in the world, and he quoted Egypt and Saudi Arabia as some of the countries they were leading the reform movement economically in the world. So Egypt, for instance, was doing pretty well in economic terms, adopting
That's true.
many reforms. The GDP was pretty high. The problem is that the benefits of these reforms didn't trickle down to the ordinary people, and there was a growing gap between the rich and the poor, and this caused problems. In addition to this, the young people that are now the majority in the Arab world were facing big challenges. There was unemployment. They couldn't make up their end needs and meet, and they sometimes didn't find their housing. Some of them couldn't even get married because they didn't have the means to do so. So there was a lot of frustration, and this led to this revolution that started first in Tunisia. It was the spark that started this revolution when this street merchant set himself on fire, and it grew up. It grew up. Then it started in Egypt on the 25th of January of this year. And what is interesting in this is that those young people who were calling for change were not calling on a sort of limited basis. They were not calling on a call based on ideology. They were not expressing animosity against the United States or Israel or so on. What they were calling for universal human rights. They were calling for the right of freedom of association, reform, and dignity. And this, of course, was a success story, because after being in Tahrir Square for so many days, eventually, I think they managed to transform the whole political regime in Egypt.
Yes.
And I must give credit both to the army that did not intervene trying to crush this revolution, and also to President Mubarak, who, when he saw the tide of the people against him, he decided to withdraw and quit the scene. So I think this revolution was successful in many ways. First of all, it showed that the people of Egypt united. The Christians and the Muslims were together, the men and the women were together, young and the elderly were together, so it was a strong unity. Secondly, it was all peaceful. They did not use violence or trying to use means that some extremists resort to in some other countries. And also, I think what was interesting is that they had a long agenda. They had expectations, and of course this is still now in a transition phase. Right. So we still have to see how things develop, but we see now a lot of political parties being formed. We've seen now also a new spirit of pride, of empowerment, and we also find that there is now much more respect for the rule of law. There's much more respect for an individual, independent judiciary. Also, the media has become much more balanced and objective in its approach, and I think there is now a roadmap for the future. There will be parliamentary elections in September, and then presidential elections later in November. So there will also be a new constitution adopted. So I think it's hopeful, and the importance of this revolution in Egypt is that Egypt is the heart and the soul of the Arab world. Whatever happens in Egypt does influence the whole region, and we've seen this. We have seen this in the past when the Arab nationalism started in Egypt in the time of President Nasser. Right. Even the Brotherhood ideology started in Egypt already in the 20s. Egypt led the Arab world towards war to recuperate its occupied territories, but also towards peace with Israel. So Egypt has always been leading the region, and through its culture, through its civilization, it always had a great impact. So what we've seen now in the rest of the Arab world has been inspired in a way by what happened in Tunisia and Egypt. I think the way it will develop in each country is different, because each country has its specificity. We cannot generalize and say that there is a trend that everything will evolve in a certain way. Each country will be different. But what is certain is if the leaders in the different countries respond to the aspirations of their people, if they're ready to introduce reforms, if they're ready to listen, to correct what was wrong in the past, then I think it will be a peaceful evolution. But if they reject the aspirations of the people, like we've seen in some, then it will lead to more bloodshed, unfortunately. And this is what we all hope we can avoid.
It seems to me suggests that when we talk about democracy and the introduction of democracy into the Arab world, we're not really talking about a Western model that is just simply transplanted.
You're absolutely right. I think we have to realize, first of all, that democracy is much wider than just having free elections.
Right.
Democracy means protection of human rights.
Right.
Democracy needs also respect for the rule of law. Democracy, in essence, is a culture, and that is why it is such a difficult concept. It is a process. It cannot be created instantly, right. And it has its ups and downs, and it has to be supported. And here I would say that the outside world should support these historic transformations in the Arab world, but should not try to impose its own concepts, because the democratic changes that are taking place in the Arab world today are a home-made product, and they have to take into account the history of the region, also its cultural and religious heritage. It's very important, so that I don't think that we can import from the West, for instance, a Western model of democracy. It will just not work.
Not work.
Exactly.
Analysts are making the following point. They're saying that in the protests, the objective is to remove what they are calling emirs, but the objective is not to remove monarchs. In other words, when it comes to monarchies like Jordan and Bahrain, you're not seeing people saying the king must go. But when it comes to Yemen and Syria and Egypt, of course, you are seeing people saying that, the president, the strong man, the leader, who must go. Is this is this a valid argument?
Well, according to my view, when you have a presidential system, you have presidents that should be elected for a certain terms, and when they stay too long, then people, of course, revolt and want change. So you see this in the presidential systems. Whereas in monarchies, you find that there is a kind of legitimacy in the system already, that we know how the succession will take place, so that people accept more the system as it is and don't call for change, but they call more for reform, adopting, for instance, a constitutional monarchy, and not just trying to get rid of the leaders.
Yes, and this is happening, for example, in Morocco, where apparently they...
Exactly, and then I must tell you also, some of the monarchies, they also have some spiritual authority, like Morocco, and Saudi Arabia. So it gives them more, I think, authority vis-a-vis their people.
What do you think? How do you think that these changes are going to affect the Palestinian-Israeli peace process?
Well, I think what is very important is that, in spite of focusing on these changes, in spite of expressing concern and the way they are going, in spite of trying to support these democratic changes, we have to realize that the Arab-Israeli conflict remains the core issue in the region, and it should not be overshadowed. It should not be put on the back burner, as we say. And I think that these changes should be an incentive for again trying to find a solution to the Palestinian problem and to the Arab-Israeli problem, because Egypt, for instance, has announced that it remains committed to its peace agreement with Israel. But I would say that the position of Egypt and of the rest of maybe the new governments that might emerge will depend on also the attitude of Israel. If Israel shows that it will engage these new governments, if it shows that it will be serious about finding a solution to the Palestinian and the Arab-Israeli problem, so I think the response from Egypt and the rest of the governments will be positive. But if Israel continues its policies of settlements in the territories, of trying to annex them, of showing that it is not serious about establishing a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, then I think we are going to see some serious developments in the region, and that is why I think we all have to hope that the United States will get involved again in an energetic way to try to facilitate the resumption of the negotiations. We think that President Obama has to assume leadership, that he has to play the role of an honest broker, not taking sides, but trying to find a just and balanced solution of the problem. And I think we expect the United States and President Obama to make an important policy statement maybe sometime next month to determine the vision of the United States towards a settlement.
And how about there has been suggestions that President Obama might perhaps go revisit Cairo and make a follow-up to his famous Cairo speech in order to adjust American foreign policy to the new circumstances.
Well, I'm sure that President Obama will be always welcome in Cairo. I come from the university, Cairo University, where he went and he made his first speech, and I'm sure people will welcome him. And I think what we are looking forward also is for the Arab world to work with the United States in partnership and to also to receive help at this delicate stage of transformation in the Arab world, because the price of democracy is not easy. You know that Egypt, for instance, went through a period where its economy suffered huge losses as a result of the changes taking place. And I would like the United States, they have promised, I think, support, but I think they should try to maybe lead in an international efforts, to really support the economy of Egypt. And it can be done in many ways. The World Bank and the IMF have already expressed their willingness to support, so there can be some a kind of Marshall Plan maybe to help Egypt and Tunisia and others. And there are many other ways. For instance, the question of debt forgiveness, the question of entering in a free trade agreement, the question of just supporting tourism, which unfortunately is not happening so far as the United States is concerned. There are many tourists coming to Egypt from Europe and from different countries of the world, but the United States still, I think, has imposed a ban on American tourists to the region, and this maybe should be lifted. So there are many ways where the United States can help in supporting the economy of Egypt and of all countries in need as a result of this democratization process.
But the final question is, one of the concerns that the Americans keep raising, including the Secretary of State, is that the danger in these events is that the region can be hijacked by extreme Islamist movements. Not just the danger of Al-Qaeda kind of moving into a vacuum, but the danger of, well, the Muslim Brotherhood, whom you mentioned, sort of taking over and creating what I think Hillary Clinton has actually called other Irans. I personally feel, I don't want to make a speech, but I feel that other Irans is a little far-fetched, because the Iranian Revolution was always mullah driven. I mean, it had, everybody knew where it was going from the very beginning. Do you think that this danger is exaggerated by the West?
I certainly do. I think that, first of all, the revolution that took place in Egypt or in Syria was not led by any Islamic movement. It was led by the young people using social media, secular people, and so the Muslim Brotherhood or other religious organization never played a leading role in this. On the other hand, we have to recognize that the Muslim Brotherhood are part of the society in Egypt. They're not the majority, but they reflect a portion of that society. Already we had the Muslim Brotherhood in Egyptian parliament before, when they had 88 representatives as independents. Yeah, because they were not legitimized at the time. So I think the Muslim Brotherhood has to be recognized, and I think it's much better, in my view, to have them part of the political system where they play a transparent role than have them out of the political system where they might play a covert role. On the other hand, I think that they have to be part of the political process, so this will mean that they have certain obligations, and they, of course, they are well organized, but this should be an impetus, I think, for the rest of the political parties to also get energized and organized, because then there will be really a competition now, which this is the essence of democracy. So I'm not alarmed, and about Egypt compared to Iran, the other day one of the top military leaders in Egypt, who was a member of the ruling council, said that Egypt will never be another Iran. So I think there is a realization among the people, among even the army in Egypt, that we are a country that accepts all kind of different groups and representations, but we will never be just one-sided, and we will never become an extremist country with one side agenda. So I think people are entitled in the West to be cautious, but in the end I think it's up to the Egyptian people to decide what kind of political system they want, what kind of country they want. And then I would underline that out of this new democracy, I think the West has to accept the outcome and cannot say, well, after all, now we're very happy that there is a democratic process, but we do not accept the result of the elections. I think this will be a very big mistake.
Right.
Sure.
What do you think is going to happen? Well, of all these countries in a state of change, let's say, which do you think is the most dangerous?
I think the one that will probably...
I mean, this is not retribution or whatever you like to call it.
No. I think Yemen is now the one where there should be a lot of concern, and I think there might be a regime change there. Even the Gulf states are trying to help that the regime should be orderly. And
the army takes over,
and
whatever the general is, whatever his name is.
Yes, and Yemen is a complex problem because you have the division between the north and the south. Sure. You have also the problem of the Houthis that are Shiites in a way. Also, you have they say some Qaeda also there that are exploiting, of course, all this turmoil. So it's a difficult, and it's a tribal country also. Tribal countries are much more difficult to control. Like Egypt is a homogeneous society, which is so much different. So I think Yemen is the country to be concerned about.
And what about Syria?
Syria
is the next most.
Well, there is a strong movement now against the regime, but I'm not sure the regime will fall. They promised reforms, but they're very slow in carrying them out.
Right.
I think they should be more forthcoming, and they should maybe remove the emergency laws. They should release some prisoners and so on. But I don't think the regime will fall. This is my personal expectation, because Bashar is a relatively young leader,
Right.
and he tried to improve the situation when he came into power, trying
Right,
to
he did,
modernize, to attract investment and so on. So he's not so much criticized and hated like in other countries.
And finally, now that Mr. Amr Musa has decided that he wants to be president of the region, what is going to happen as far as the Secretary General of the
Arab League? Well, Amr Musa is leaving his office on the 15th of May.
Right.
And there is an Egyptian candidate, and there is
Who is the Egyptian
Qatari candidate.
Who is the Egyptian?
The Egyptian candidate is called Dr. Mustafa Al-Fiki.
But wasn't he part of the old gang?
He was part, but he also sort of has taken some independent position. And some people still criticize him, but he's the official candidate.
And the Qatari?
Qatari, he's called Atiyah, Abdurrahman Atiyah. He's the former Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council.
Oh.
He had 2 terms. He just finished.
Right, okay.
So now they put him forward as a candidate.
Qatar is pushing him like crazy.
Yes, yes.
And is there an outsider who's going to win if these two lose?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge.
Not to my knowledge.
So we're not going to see any surprises there, you think? You think the Egyptian will win?
Well, so far Egypt has the backing of many countries. Qatari is sometimes more controversial.
But he has more money.
He has more money, exactly.
He has a lot more money. And he wants to be
But
he wants to be a major player.
But there has been a traditional that the Egyptian, where the seat of the league is, has been always the Secretary General. And when the league moved to Tunisia, then it was a Tunisian.
Right, right.
But some countries are saying now, of course, we need a rotation. We need other countries.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I thought that's what I've heard. In fact,
Yeah.
it's a good idea to try something.